Thank you very much. My name is Bami Shokwe Adeyanju, and I'm the National Director of Programming and Events, and also the Convention 54th National Convention Coordinator. We are very grateful that you are here. Like I was saying, I understand how busy you are. I understand you have very thick schedule, but here you are, and you're being very helpful to us. I think you waited about 5 minutes or so before you were allowed to enter, so I wanted to thank you for that. I also wanted to appreciate Kirkland, your firm, who is sponsoring this panel. The name of the panel is Private Equity and the Specific Role of Lawyers. I will start by introducing our very first panelist, Miss Angela Oldham. Angela Oldham is a fifth-year corporate associate in Kirkland's Chicago office. She received a Juris Doctor from DePaul University College of Law in December 2016, where she graduated summa cum laude, Order of the Coif, and ranking first in her class. She was also the executive editor for the DePaul Law Review. Angela's legal practice focuses on advising private equity firms and public and private companies on complex mergers and acquisitions and corporate transactions, including domestic and international mergers and acquisitions, corporate carve-out transactions, recapitalizations, leveraged buyouts, and going private transactions. Prior to joining Kirkland as an associate, Angela was a summer associate at both Sidley Austin LLP and Kirkland. And prior to law school, she worked for Target to remodel stores in Arizona. Outside of work, Angela is also passionate about her family. She has a husband and 2 girls. In her free time, you can find her catching up on Real Housewives, Survivor, or reading the latest Colin Hoover novel. Next, I will introduce Mr. Mark Holloway. So Mr. Mark Holloway is not here, but I am very hopeful that he would be able to join us soon. So I will just introduce him anyway. Mark is the corporate associate in Kirkland and Ellis LLP New York office. He focuses in his practice primarily on mergers and acquisitions, corporate governance, and shareholder activism defense. Mark regularly represents private equity firms and public companies in complex transactions with experience spanning the entire range of mergers and acquisition activity, including many significant leveraged buyouts, minority investments, strategic mergers, joint ventures, and cross-border transactions. Corporate clients that Mark had represented includes, among others, Wynn Resorts, Accenture, Six Flags, amongst others. Mark currently serves on the New York office associate committee and is a co-head of the New York office's Black Affinity Group. Outside of work, Mark engages civically to help communities of color empower themselves through professional development and the pursuit of higher education. Mark is on the Young Leadership Board of America Needs You New Jersey, where he focuses on fundraising and mentor recruiting. Mark graduated from my alma mater, Columbia College, with a BA in political science, and graduated with a JD/an MBA from Columbia Law School and Columbia Business School in 2017. Next, I will introduce Mr. Eric St. Bernard. Eric St. Bernard is a corporate associate also in New York, in the New York office of Kirkland and Ellis. He received his BA in Communications and English Literature from DePaul University in 2015. And he also received a JD from Howard University School of Law in 2020 and was subsequently admitted to the New York Bar. While in law school, Mr. Bernard was the editor-in-chief of the Howard Human and Civil Rights Law Review. His practice focuses on representing public and private companies and private equity funds and their portfolio companies on complex public and private mergers and acquisition, business combinations involving SPACs and debt finance transactions. Before joining Kirkland and Ellis, Eric was a summer associate at Davis Polk and Wardwell and Arnold and Porter in 2018 and 2019. He also worked with the Adobe and Oracle corporations. Please join me in welcoming our very awesome associates from Kirkland and Ellis. Please use your chat function and your reaction. Thank you so much for being here. While introducing you, I stuttered like around several big words, private equity, mergers and acquisition, SPACs, and that's one of the reasons why we're here. These are terms that a lot of us do not know. I personally, I am trying to transition into, private equity, corporate practice. So a lot of those terms are very, very, strange and foreign to us. So my very first question would, of course, ask about your career trajectory because we're interested in knowing how you got here. And then mostly this panel is about understanding what exactly private equity is. So my first question is, as corporate attorneys, and any of you can answer this, as corporate attorneys with a private equity practice, can you please tell us about your journey? Did you always want to be corporate attorneys? At what point in your journey did you decide to practice in this field, in this specific field? And what necessary moves did you make to get to where you are today? Thank you.
Let me start it off, Eric. Thank you. It was a beautiful introduction. I appreciate it. And no apologies needed for the phone. It happens to us all. And thank you to everybody for having us here. We're both happy to be here. My journey, I will say, well, I didn't even start off as a lawyer. I graduated from college and had a whole different career for 6 or 7 years before I even decided to go to law school. And when I went to law school, I thought that I would be doing labor and employment law. That's why I went. I wanted to fight the good fight for the employees. And as as I tried different things during my first couple of semesters of law school, networked with attorneys and talked to people, I slowly just started checking things off my list that I felt like didn't sync up with my personality, or I didn't feel like I liked, or didn't feel like I could do for the long haul, or didn't feel like I could do for the late night hours. And ultimately that brought me to big law. And there, I tried labor and employment again. And I learned that I was excited about the facts, the dispute between the two parties, but ultimately in big law, you're hardly ever really, fighting for the little guy. You're representing the big attorneys, the big company, so that didn't feel as great or as rewarding. It wasn't what I was looking for. And then also, I loved the facts, but I didn't like actually doing the work. And when I tried corporate work, which was suggested to me from a company I worked in-house for a little bit, for a couple of weeks, randomly in the beginning of a summer. The general counsel there suggested I try corporate work. And the first time I tried marking up a contract or document, not even knowing what I was doing, it just kind of resonated with me. It almost felt like doing a Sudoku puzzle, trying to fit all these pieces together in a way that made sense. And I guess I didn't know what type of, corporate lawyer that I wanted to be. So I was lucky that I found my way to Kirkland and Ellis, where we get to try a whole different types of corporate practice. But ultimately that's how I found my way to private equity.
Mr. Burnett?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, Angela. Sorry for kind of putting you on the spot there. I say this all the time, when I start these, just in terms of how firms work, Angela is a lot more senior than I am of an attorney. And had, if we were on a deal, that would be who I'm reporting to and who I'm speaking to. So I always kind of use that cop out when I'm on these panels and say I defer to the person most senior to me. I think for me, corporate law and how that all came together was very much the professional kind of mending with the personal, if that makes a sense. If that makes sense, in terms of before matriculating to law school, I did consulting for Oracle Corporation, which is a big tech firm. I'm sure you guys are familiar with. I did that for about 2 years, and going through like the interview process, because I did quote unquote technology, I always thought that I wanted to be an IP litigator, intellectual property litigator, and I did a few clerks, relating to that in law school. But again, the professional mends with the personal, in that I found around my second year of law school, I got really interested in like investments. I got really interested in finance. I got interested in how businesses work. And that coupled with the consulting experience, and that on top of the fact that how the law works, it's very much Angela's in our Chicago office, but the legal field and I think your practice is very much regional sometimes, meaning my opportunities being an IP litigator would have been profoundly different where I was in San Francisco, California, far away from our family. I'm in Brooklyn. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I'm there right now. I'm here right now, versus practicing in New York City, again, where my family is from, which happens to be the quote unquote financial capital of the world, and where a lot of these law firms that you would be familiar with are kind of based out of. New York City presents itself as way more of a place to be a corporate lawyer as opposed to a litigator. So these are all like things that I think as law students we kind of overlook or sometimes don't really think about. But as I went through my journey, figuring out what law firm I wanted to go to and kind of what I wanted to practice, it started all coming together again with the personal and the professional, and kind of leading me to, being a corporate lawyer here in New York. I would say it was kind of my experience.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bernard. So it's also like it makes me feel a little bit good to know that you did not start out, both of you did not start out, doing private equity work, just because, again, I personally am very excited about this panel because I'm trying to transition, entirely into corporate practice. And I already identified that I would be very interested in private, equity as a specialized area of law. And just a few minutes ago, we were in this big law 101 panel where we had lawyers talk to us about the various practice areas in law firms, not just corporate law. So they talked about litigation and mediation and like all sorts. But this panel is very important because we are very specialized. Like we really want to know what private equity is, what private equity is not. And I want you to please tell us in layman's term, understanding that we're training to be lawyers, right? But even while reading your profiles, your huge profiles, like I was flustered by some of the big words. So I want you to please tell us in very layman's term what private equity is. Like are there private equity specific investments that you are interested in? Are you interested in private equity in investments in health, in real estate, in finance, in technology, in like what kind of private equity investments are you interested in? Then also, as attorneys working for a law firm that is the highest ranked in private equity, what does your day look like? What are those specific roles that you find yourself engaging in every other day when you resume work?
Very big question, but a good one. And I would say you find you're in good company if you have no idea what private equity is. I remember being in law school. I remember even when I started at Kirkland, not really knowing what private equity was. I just liked the work that was presented to me when I was a summer associate. And I was frankly excited to learn. And I was excited to take back this subject matter that I knew nothing about and bring it back to my family and and see how they would grow, from learning about, entity formation and investing and things like that. So I dove in, not probably knowing wrong information about what private equity is. And now, I mean, I will give my overview of it. So at the heart of it, when you are dealing with investing in securities, buying and selling a company, for example, that all of that is required to be registered publicly. And they do that, that's for the safety, and this is just for the United States, but that's for the safety of investors. They don't want people to be swindled, right? And so in order to not go through the public markets, you have to have an exemption. If you guys haven't taken securities regulation, you will at some point or before the bar, and you'll learn all of this. And private equity is one of those exemptions, a private equity fund. It starts with the forming of that fund, which is essentially a bunch of people who qualify for exemptions under the securities regulation laws, people who we aren't concerned, like they invest all the time, or they have enough assets that they can lose some. You know, we're not concerned about these people not having enough information to make an investment on. And so they're able to pool their funds together and form a private equity fund managed by a general partner. And it's a win-win for these limited partners, these people who have pooled their money, because they can make a passive investment and see a return on that investment in a few years. And it's also a win-win for the general partner, which are our clients like the Tomo Bravos, B and GTCRs of the world, because they get a management fee for managing that private equity fund. And they also, after all of the limited partners get paid, get to take a cut of the profits as well, which we call carry, if you ever hear that term used. And so that's the basic bones of like forming a fund. And then that fund goes out, which is now an entity, and it goes to buy companies within the market. And their goal is to take that company and make it more profitable. Maybe buy an add-on to that company eventually and create some synergies. They're going to take that company, look at what's going wrong and what's going right, and make adjustments within that company to make it more profitable. They do a lot of this, right? Like it's all based with the money that other people provided. So they haven't put any money in. Plus, when they buy the company, they're going to take on like 80 to 90%, maybe less, debt. So they're not putting a ton of money into the structure. But ultimately, let's call it 4 or 5 years down the line, after they've made all of these improvements, they're going to sell that company for a profit, maybe to another private equity fund or another private individual, or they'll let it go public in the market. Or if things don't go right, they will have a restructuring and hopefully get all the LPs back, at least the capital that they put in. But that's essentially what private equity is in a nutshell. Eric, would you add anything to that description of private equity?
You see what I mean? Like, I think that was like such a good description of the overall life cycle, and definitely not much like substantively that I would add. I would just say kind of from a, I guess, career or like real life standpoint, only being here, I want to say, 18 months, close to 2 years, in terms of how fast private equity works. To give like a real life example, I have seen essentially a client of mine, so a client, which is the private equity firm, would sometimes have a portfolio company that Angela was just running us through in terms of what sometimes we do as attorneys. We buy and sell those companies. I've seen kind of that entire life cycle, and just, I guess, being here at the firm and very, very grateful to have been here. But like seeing that from when I started in 2020, and I had this one client or this one portfolio company that as of, I think last week, I'm sorry, 2 months ago, we signed the deal. Next week, we're closing the deal. Like having seen that from, again, when you look at a calendar, right? From the fall of 2020, when I started, maybe a few months after that. So early 2021 till it's March 2022. In 1 year, that entire life cycle that Angela, went through with us, it's very, very likely to happen in the private equity world. And so, that might be a little much from, grasping that visually, but it's just an example of like how fast things work. And a big part of it, again, that would tie back with what Angela was giving us, that lack of regulations, the lack of, SEC, watching over what you have to do, because we know that, as she mentioned, the investors are supposed to be, this is a huge argument that it would be saved for another day, but the investors that are funding or the limited partners of these vehicles are supposed to be so sophisticated, are supposed to be, apt to loss. And I say this should be it for another day, because something that we should pen is how that affects us as a community, right? And how those guidelines, the undertones of them, but again, not going to get into that now. I think that was a great description of PE, and hopefully some of that, stuck with our members here.
And I mean, to get to the rest of her question as well, like lawyers have so many roles within private equity. And Eric, I don't know if you have just done M&A, but at Kirkland, I've been on the fund formation side. So I've been the team forming the private equity fund and negotiating with limited partners, because when they join a private equity fund, they get to say like, hey, I represent the Illinois Teachers Retirement Fund, and so we need X, Y, and Z rights as a part of this. Or I represent Oprah, and so Oprah needs to have X, Y, and Z as a part of this like private equity fund. These are real stories. But like you negotiate with these people to get them their rights and ultimately get down to an agreement that all of the limited partners are signed up to. Lawyers also play a role in funding the debt and negotiating the credit facilities with the lenders when you actually go to purchase the portfolio companies. Lawyers also obviously play a role in the merger and acquisition context when you're buying and selling the companies, negotiating that purchase agreement, negotiating the ancillary documents. Lawyers play a role when you're going public and negotiating the public company documents. And so there's so many different roles, and I think we've filled all of them at different times. And so especially when I was a first and second year associate, every day could be different. I'm flipping from matters where I'm forming a fund to doing an IPO to buying and selling a company, all for different clients. And, some of this is you at a computer in your office, but a lot of it is done, live over phone call meetings, or sometimes in person to person doing negotiation. But every day is different. And like to Eri's point, it moves quickly. So you're always on your toes juggling. You're like the world's best problem solver, or you're supposed to be, as you every day, different fire drills coming your way to figure out how ultimately you're going to accomplish the goals set out by the client.
Wow, you've said a lot. This sounds very interesting to me personally. You said words like forming a fund, managing the fund, buying and selling companies, which implicates, mergers and acquisition, negotiation. I don't know if restructuring features in all of that too. So you've actually answered my question, and you've said a lot. And you've also provided me a perfect segue into my next question. But before I ask that question, I came about this quote from a distinguished or a professor of corporate business and transactional law at Columbia Law School. I would like to, quote him and then, ask the question. So according to Professor David Scheiser, like I said, of a professor of corporate business and transactional law at Columbia Law School, he said, I quote, "The central responsibility of transactional lawyers is to help overcome information and incentive problems. They do so with a range of contractual and organizational responses, such as due diligence, contingent purchase price, staged financing, and vouching by third parties." So my question is, what are these responsibilities, due diligence, contingent purchase price, vouching by third parties that Professor Scheiser described in his quote, what do these responsibilities entail in practice? What do they specifically entail? And what, in your opinion, are the other roles that lawyers have to save deals?
You want me to take it away? Okay. Yeah, I will say it's a very interesting quote. I hadn't heard it before. But I guess I think of it as like, right, that's the ins and outs of our job. A private equity fund is there to make a turn on their investment. Now that means, like I said, they're usually bringing debt to the table. And so, but what happens if that debt doesn't come through? That would be a concern. I guess it's a concern for both, but like, if I'm the company that's being bought, I want to know that I'm going to get my money come the closing day before I hand over the keys of this business. And as the lawyers, it's our job to figure out, okay, how are we solving this gap? Like, what can we offer you to reassure you that we're good for it? Enter an equity commitment letter, which is an ancillary document that we draw, which says, listen, we know we're good for it. The debt's going to come through. If we don't do it, here's an agreement saying that if we don't, we agree to pony up the cash for this thing under these certain conditions. So that's one way that like our job meets the concerns of our client. And there's so many others, right? Like maybe maybe on the sell side, they don't want to put a ton of cash in up front. Maybe they want to see how the business does first, and then provide additional cash. Enter in an earnout provision to say, okay, I'm not going to give you the full purchase price, but you could be entitled to more. If you stay with the business and the business does as well as you said it was going to do, then 12 months from now, if we meet X, Y, and Z goals, here's, an extra $1.5 million for you, or whatever the terms of the agreements are. And it's us not only doing the drafting. For many of our clients, it's also us coming up with those ideas to say, here's what we've seen before in the market. Here's how other people are solving these issues. And of course, because of how quickly our deals move, we see this stuff all of the time. And so we're able to offer up these things, pretty easily when the scenarios present themselves.
Thank you, Ms. Oldham. So I'm told Mr. Mike Holloway is around. Mr. Mike Holloway, we are very pleased to have you. I don't know if you got my question. Did you? We would like to hear what you have to say about the question.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. And yes, I did hear the question, and my apologies for being late. I could not get off a call with the client, but I think what the quote you read, I think what it fundamentally describes is like what the role of a lawyer is, one of risk allocation and trying to understand and put our clients in the best position to assess that risk, to price that risk, to deal with it, to mitigate it. And where Angela described were several instances where the risks may be binary between the buyer and seller, whereas there are lots of other things that can impact deal certainty, such as the regulatory regime. So we think about antitrust, we think about how the Biden administration has regulated mergers and acquisitions very differently than the Trump administration. And we have to navigate our clients through different things like that. So we may allocate, or we may think about, when will a contract terminate? And do we have provisions to extend the contract if we run up a certain date and we still haven't received regulatory approval? Or in the event that we don't get regulatory approval, what parts of the business that are being acquired may be willing to be divested up to a certain dollar threshold? It could be up to a sort of a fictitious, nefarious standard of material adverse effect. There's lots of different ways that we think about risk allocation, but fundamentally what we're trying to do is take the knowledge that we have of being the people who do buy and sell companies every day, who do lead these investments every day, and like Angela was saying, bring in the nuances of the market, other ways people will problem solve, but also just advise our clients in ways that they are, when they're putting their capital at risk, they know that they've mitigated every risk that they can.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holloway. Mr. Bernard, do you have thoughts on the question?
Yeah, not much to add. I think Angela and Mark covered the majority of it. I think we talked a bit on and on Mark's latter point. I think one of the important roles that we have that he mentioned and to think about is being, I guess, a source of data, and being a source of you know, the individuals that have done this and have seen this in, you know, 20 different iterations in 30 different ways. I think that when you think about, you know, legal counsel, and when you think about advice, I think that is one of the core roots of it, is having the experience and having the expertise to kind of foresee, hey, I've done this before, I've seen it, I haven't seen this exact thing, but I've seen something like it. And I think that's one of the, you know, to me personally, one of the thrills of the job is nothing would be the same, but being able to build on, I think Angela called it a puzzle, which is, you know, so accurate, to build on this puzzle based on the experience that you had, you know, beforehand.
Thank you very much for all the brilliant, you know, answers. I feel like I know what private equity is already from all your, you know, very enlightening. Thank you, Ms. Oldham. So I'm still a little bit curious, maybe not a little bit. I'm very curious about the fact that Kirkland and Ellis is the #1, like, highest ranked private equity law firm. As early as, I think this 2021, I don't know if there's a 2022 vault ranking out yet. Okay, so I'm just curious, like, so like what that tells me is that you must be dealing with a lot, like, you know, for you to be excellent at what you do. Like, so are there challenges that you face, you know, while dealing with your clients, and how do you meet, you know, your set goals? How do you meet, you know, how do you resolve these challenges? Because I know that you must be doing a very great job at resolving your challenges and, you know, doing very well by your clients, for your firm to continue to be the, you know, the best, you know, highest ranked law firm in private equity. So I'm just curious, could you please tell me what challenges you face while dealing with your clients, and how you know, practically resolve those challenges on a daily basis? Mr. Mark Holloway, do you want to go first?
Sure, no problem. So I think one of the things you were alluding to is like just the sheer volume of transactions that we deal with on a given basis, and I think that's like maybe the fundamental pillar of what makes this job challenging, is the fact that, you know, our clients pay a very, you know, expensive rate for our attention and our time, and they want to feel like they're getting their money's worth. And so while, you know, a conversation between Angela and me, or between Eric and me about, you know, we've got all these other things to do before something else for a client, like, is like, it's pretty reasonable and it happens often. However, that's not a conversation I want to have with my client, to say, I've got all these other things I've got to put ahead of your transaction because this may be their own game, and this may be the only thing they have going on, but more importantly, they're paying for the service. So what I think fundamentally, like the way that is best to deal with that is to be open and to be upfront about what's going to happen, and to use the experience you have, knowing that you do M&A transactions every day of the week. You've seen them, you can see what's going to come next, or what the approximate timeline to get something done is, and you can dictate those things to a client. If a client wants to go incredibly fast, or wants to move at a pace that's perhaps unreasonable, letting a client know what the risks are of going so fast, what the risks are of, are we actually gaining anything from, for the 4 or 5 extra days we're saving? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. And if so, what are the resources we need to get that done? But I think primarily the best way to deal with, a crazy deal environment is to use the fact that you are in that deal environment, and that it's not a foreign land for you. The clients are paying for that expertise, and to be able to negotiate, draft, and to lead them to the right outcome. But that's more than just what's on the 4 pages of a document, or 4 corners of a document, or what's inside of a negotiation. It's about guiding your client, and not necessarily being at odds with them when they have deadlines, they have things that they have bills to pay too. They have people who are invested in their firms. So understanding that it's not a contentious race, but it's more so you working in lockstep with your client and understanding their needs.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. Any other thoughts on the question?
Yeah, that's definitely the number one problem that I think of too. The number one challenge in this job. The other challenge that I think of is sometimes lesser talked about, but our clients' egos, right? There's a lot of money flying back and forth here. And not only our clients, right, but very often the people on the other side, lawyers included. And sometimes I find that the best thing we can do to manage like our clients' egos, when they feel like they've presented a reasonable package that anyone should accept, is helping them to remember, right, that we're talking about dollars in and dollars out. So if they're taking cash off the table, look for value elsewhere. It's all in some game. And I have found that, like, as the lawyer, if I can keep a cool head and the ultimate goal in mind, that what we're trying to do is all end up in the same exact place, which is the deal closed, and that we're able to get through without with everybody checking their egos to some extent at the door. A prime example of that, yesterday, I had a financial advisor really get our client very worked up about a cross-border transaction that we were working on. And I think the financial advisor's actual words was that the transaction could not be done because of the cross-border nature. Well, we do cross-border transactions all the time, and we know how to problem solve efficiently. And the client was so spun up that he gave me a call, and he was like, what am I going to do? I have to call the other side, and I have to tell them that we can't do the deal, or that we have to go back and they have to redo everything for the valuation. And I was like, let's take this one step at a time. And it was my job to walk my client through how there was a clear path forward, how we don't have to let the accountants and the financial advisors spin us up. What we need to do is go back to them and explain to them how a deal process works, and to help them walk lockstep with us. That's a huge part of our job, is client management. In the same way that we have to gently push back on timelines when they are unreasonable, we also have to keep everybody's egos and the emotions that they might feel about all these large sum of monies going back and forth in check as well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Oldham. So I have a specific question for all the panelists, but I would really love Mr. Bernard's insights on this particular question, just because I feel that is a little bit closer to us, having been a young professional like every of our other panelists. So the question, so we have a lot of questions, I think 2 or 3 in the chat box. If anybody has questions, please put it in the chat box, and you can also ask orally if you want. But I would ask our panelists this last question, starting with Mr. Bernard, and then we will take the questions in the chat. And so it's about students like myself and some other students here who are very interested in emulating your footsteps. So the question is, so for students who want to pursue this career path, they want to be corporate attorneys, right? But they want to specialize in private equity and mergers and acquisition. So what skills would you advise that they develop? That's number one. Are there doctrinal and experiential courses that you would advise that they take in their second and third years to maximize their options? Sorry, this is a lot of questions, but the questions are very intertwined. Moving on, are there internships or externships or professional training and other opportunities that you think students interested in this field should be considering or investing in order to maximize their abilities to get the best jobs, like jobs with Kirkland and Ellis after graduation? So Mr. Bernard, I wanted to go first and help us answer this. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. And I know you weren't trying to call Mark and Angela old at all. That wasn't the intent. But no, I definitely get it, right? I definitely understand why, I interviewed with Kirkland twice, and I remember both of those interviews like they were yesterday, right? But they were like 2018, 2019 that I interviewed here. And this answer, I remember like being a law student and being at all these like events with other firms and trying to get recruited. And, at Howard, I had some alumni tell me this, and I remember being so upset when they said it and kind of offended what I'm about to say right now. It literally comes down to who came in and who worked their butts off from an academic perspective. And I think there can be debates on how law school works and the ranking systems, and so be it. And we can all have those debates, but I think, not to oversimplify it, but the individuals and the students that have done exceptionally well in the classroom likely get the opportunities, as you all know, at firms like Kirkland, at our peers, at our competitors, and doing the complex, like substantive work that we do. And I say that because, another answer is I don't think it's an expectation that any law student knows much about private equity, or that any student knows as much about, being a strategic buyer and what that means and how that ties into, to the approach on the deal. Like they are kind of supposed to be foreign concepts. And I tell this all the time to current law students, just as common law was super foreign when you started your first day of law school, just like criminal law and criminal procedure and the Second Amendment would be the first time that you sit down and read those cases. And so I think law school and the way it works, and the reason that people are so adamant about your performance and like the quote unquote ranking system, is because if you can sit down and take the time and brief a case on, a constitutional law case that happened 200 years ago, and understand it, be able to, get that the level of understanding across the professor in a subsequent, in a very, very efficient manner, chances are you can also do the same with disclosure schedules, right? Which is a document that you work on. It could do the same with, with board consents and kind of like figure it out that way. So I think one is a focus on your academic performance and a focus on like showing your value on paper. And then I think a plus would be, showing some sort of interest in the industry, or doing things to position yourselves to, to be a better candidate for any law firm or any corporate law practice. And this is coming from someone that studied English literature and communications in undergrad, which is like why I'm giving this speech, right? Like, I don't think that if, you know, there are a lot of people that do have this background, you know, looking at Mark, and I think that it's very, very helpful too. But I also don't think it's like, if you don't have it, you should steer away, you know, from the industry or from the practice.
Thank you so much, Mr. Burnett. Ms. Oldham and Mr. Holloway, can you please, in very summarily, tell us whether there are specific courses in law school that students interested in this field should be taking, and then we'll quickly move on to the questions in the chat. I think they're very interesting questions that we would love to, you know, get your insights on. So what specific doctrinal courses or experiential classes should law students interested in this field be taking?
Yeah, I will give you some examples, but I very much am of the school of thought that you should just take whatever you want. Like, it's your money that you're spending. Take whatever classes that you want in law school. It's your passion, it's your money, and you should get what you want out of it. I took immigration law. I do not regret it. I don't regret it. It has nothing to do with my practice, but I felt I should know something about it. But if you're just like aching to know more about, like, securities regulation is a great class to take. I also think it's helpful preparation for the bar in the event they ask, like, securities regulation questions, a fundamental business organizations class so that you sort of know the basics. Those are two that come top of my mind if you want to walk away with like a core understanding. And if your institution happens to have classes on mergers and acquisitions as well, and you want to do it, have at it. Sometimes those are very different in the classroom than the job that we actually do. But if it feels good to you and you're interested in it and you want to try it, more power to you.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And to just add something, I think, different, I would encourage people to, if you can, take classes in your business school. Or take classes anywhere not in your law school. The primary reason is most of your clients won't be lawyers. And so, like, preparing yourself to deal with other people's issues or think through things or see the same issue through someone else's lens, I think would be just incredibly useful, because this is a relationship-driven business, and developing trust is something that is accomplished across multiple different angles. And in addition to some of the doctrinal courses that Angela spoke to, and just actually performing the best you can in law school, like Eric noted, I think it's a tremendous opportunity. You're not like, your job is to learn how to be a lawyer, but like, there's a lot of time in the day, and focusing in on certain nuances around like the people side of it, with the business element of it. You have the time. You have a .edu at the end of your email address, meaning that people are going to respond to you just because you said, hey, I don't know anything about what you do, but I'd love to learn. But like, when you start working for other folks, like, you become a whole lot less interested to have that conversation. So use the fact that you have that .edu and fire off emails. It costs you absolutely nothing. And even with the lowest hit rate, it'll enrich your experience in ways that, you know, you'll lose that ability as soon as, you hit the workforce.
And I'll just say that I think the best skill that you can walk away from law school having gained, outside of the ability to network, because you have to do that for forever, is the ability to be able to respond to a question off the bat. The cold calling you get in any law school class, like, that's how it is on a call with a client or a call with a partner. It's the same sort of experience where all of a sudden you have to regurgitate information that you may have read a month ago or a week ago, and being able to store that information and regurgitate it in a way that you don't sound like you're bumbling through is a learned skill, and something that you guys are all getting the opportunity to experience in your law school classes right now.
As a testament to the fact that our student attendees and every other person attending have enjoyed this panel so much, we have several questions in the chat. And I'm going to be very respectful of your time. Obviously, I can't take all the questions, but it's very gratifying that we have all of these questions. So well done to our panelists. You've done a very good job in exposing us to what private equity is, and I think that's why we have all of these questions. So I'm going to combine one or like two of the questions together just because they're similar. The first question says that how much investigation or coordinating with other departments do you have to do in addressing a client's needs? And related to that is, what sources do you consult to see how others are structuring their deals?
I'll take a stab at that. I mean, as an M&A attorney, I mean, that's like the core task is to coordinate. You may often hear the term quarterback a deal. The idea is to effectively move pieces around, ensure people have the right amount of information. The way that a law firm typically functions, every element that a transaction touches, such as like tax or employee benefits or labor, may not be the front-facing people who communicate with the client on a daily basis. However, it's our job to communicate and coordinate with our colleagues in those areas, understand what they're seeing, and be able to digest and distill that information up to the client or allocate the risk appropriately. That could be through reps and warranties. That could be through disclosures that we have to make against those reps. There's a lot of different nuances in terms of solving for those things in terms of coordination. But fundamentally, core to an M&A attorney's experience is coordinating. It is making sure that whatever it is the client needs to get the transaction done. There are areas of law that we don't practice, but like it's not as if we can ignore it and not have it diligence or not have it be addressed. So that's gonna definitely be core to what we do. And then in terms of your question about structuring the transaction and kind of with authorities, a lot of that's going to be driven by tax in a private equity transaction depending, like a lot of the tax treatment and nuances are going to be driven by who the ultimate sellers are, who are the sellers of the transaction, how they hold the actual entity that's being sold, and the consideration being paid. But sources of authority that can go into structuring deals beyond tax can often include the statutory requirements to affect the transaction. So if it's a merger, following whatever the applicable merger statute is, if it's a public company transaction, there'll be laws governing the SEC will govern public securities, and there are nuances and rules. So the authority is as limited as the potential for the transaction structure.
Thank you so much. So I have a request. Is it possible that we take extra 5 minutes of your time? I don't know if that's okay.
Yeah, I owe you more than 5, so I'll stick on.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I want Ms. Oldham's perspective about that question. I also want Mr. Bernard's perspective, but it's a similar question that was asked. So I'm just going to put it out there, and then I will hear from both of you. The question is, what do you read or watch to be in the know in your industry and stay in the race?
I'll start. We're so spoiled at Kirkland, Ellis, because we get a summary sent to us every day about what's going on in the market, and we get to curate, the different things that we want to know about, right? And we get that sent to our inboxes every day, first thing in the morning. And I always try, before I get into the minutia of everything else that's in my inbox, to click through a couple of those. In addition to that, we also get summaries of like what's going on in case law that of course impacts our deals in real time. what the courts are saying and how they're interpreting different provisions. And so we're always reading up and staying up on that. In addition, I think for myself personally, I still try and flip through the Wall Street Journal once a week to see what's going. I did that as a law student too. I just think it's a good practice to have a sense of like what's going on in the market. And just keep your pulse on like, what are people talking about? Like, what's the hot new item? What's the hot new industry? I think that's good stuff to know. And although it won't come up in every conversation, it will for sure come up. And you'll be glad that you can be a part of those conversations with clients. I don't think, and then obviously we have a ton of in-house training that we get to take part of that is more than enough to supplement everything that you need to know about what is going on in the market.
Mr. Bernard?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was like a great response. Internally, being, you mentioned like, you know, the top private equity firm and having the amount of clients that we do. I think even internally we are like inundated with resources just amongst ourselves and from a firm perspective. I would also touch a bit on, I think, you know, outside of the firm, I set up like Google alerts, for example. So I have like Kirkland and Ellis as one of like my, you know, like anything Kirkland related I want to know about. I literally have private equity as another like search factor. So anything where, you know, there's private equity in the news, I kind of like scroll through that. And then I think it's a bit of like what I mentioned earlier in terms of like why I enjoy the practice and why corporate is that, you know, and Angela touched on it. I know Mark and I have had, you know, inside conversations about this and like how important it is to take these concepts, to take the things that we're learning and bring it back to our communities. I think that that's huge. I think that it's huge, just one, being an attorney, but two, for some of us, like being, you know, one of, or maybe the first people in our family to probably, you know, make the earnest income that we do, or like be in the rooms that we're in. I kind of take that onto myself, like I said, and got personally interested in like, what does an investment look like, right? Like what does IRR mean? Like I'm very much passionate about that from like a personal perspective too, and like how that also impacts my community in a positive light. So I think that just having a natural you know, a natural interest also really does help to like stay informed and stay you know, stay alert. And then when you all do start practicing Law Institute, that sounds funny, but PLI is also a really good resource that I've been using as well.
Wow, thank you so much to all of our panelists. I am very excited. Like I've, you know, have so many takeaways. I've jotted very copiously, and one of the things that is staying with me, that will stay with me even after today, is the fact that I can take other courses, you know, so that I can learn to deal with other people, just like Mr. Holloway said. And I think to Angela's point about, you know, reading the Wall Street Journal, I am going to subscribe to one of the, like, just subscribe to maybe Business Day, like anything that would help me to know what's going on in the market. I think these are very practical advice. And, you know, like, and then to your point about courses that we can take, you know, to help us understand the field before. And thank you, somebody put on the chat, Bloomberg, WSJ, thank you so much. So I personally have had a very nice time in this panel. I just want to thank you again for being here this evening. We appreciate you. We honor you. We understand you're busy, but yet you're here. Thank you so much for being of service to the National Black Law Student Association. We're grateful once again, and we thank you for Kirkland sponsorship. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I hope you rest this weekend. I hope you're not working this weekend. Thank you so much, our panelists. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye.